May I speak in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Well, the quotation that you've just heard was Jesus, of course, speaking in St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 11. It is immensely reassuring, and I've often read it just before going to bed of an evening. There is something calming about it. And there's a great human need for reassurance in difficult times. Sometimes we search out instinctively, automatically, without conscious thought, for that which brings us peace when the world is too busy, or too rushed, or too ridiculous for words. Not only are some Bible passages extremely soothing for the troubled, but they can go some way in the hearts of believers to remove the actual causes of tension and conflict, and they promote appropriate action to be taken to resolve the matter. But we're not talking about the spiritual equivalent of an aspirin. We're not talking about the removal of mere symptoms here. We're talking about action on the removal of the causes of those symptoms, on the causes of suffering, on the causes of strife, on the causes of inner conflict, on the causes of pain. For Christians, wanting to lead a new life means getting rid of the old, and that means letting go of the causes of pain too, which is of course easier said than done. Sometimes we want to cling on to the familiar, even if it is pain causing. That's especially true if it's been with us for some time. So Jesus seems to be talking to all who suffer, to all of us in today's gospel passage. Lay down your heavy burdens, he says. There is simply no need to carry them anymore. When Jesus was on the way to the cross, which modern pilgrims, I guess, picture when walking the Via Dolorosa, he was helped by a passerby, Simon of Cyrene. Jesus now offers us the same. Lay down your burdens, he says, and I will give you rest. Our gospel passage, interestingly, continues with some more words in the same sentence. Take my yoke upon you. Now, if you were reading this in Asia, you'd have a picture in your mind of water buffalo on their own, singly, carrying out some labouring task. And that's fine. But if you were reading it somewhere in the rest of the world, you would probably have a picture in your mind of oxen or whatever working together in the form of a pair, two creatures being held together by a yoke to carry out the same difficult task. And that's probably what was the picture that the readers of this gospel had in mind. The people of the Holy Land in that day, the people of the Mediterranean world in that day, people of Europe and Africa and the Near East in that day had in mind a picture of two oxen linked together, performing a task, acting in partnership, working as a pair, working as a team. So perhaps it's only our current viewpoint where we've seen things on the telly from Asia and in other places, which perhaps clouds the image. Oxen, quite often, used to work as a team. Of course, if people were very poor, then they had to work singly, of course. But in this instance, the picture is that of a team. So perhaps we could explore this metaphor further. Jesus is approaching us, already yoked up, it seems, and already carrying a weighty burden, one we couldn't manage. But he is not troubled by it. Now, Jesus could be suggesting, I guess, one of three things in the words that he said. Firstly, Jesus could be suggesting that the person in the story transfer their load entirely over to him. In other words, I will give you rest means Jesus will do all the heavy lifting from now on. There's a second interpretation. It's also possible that Jesus may be offering temporary relief. Jesus will do all the work now to allow recovery, but it's expected that both parties pull their weight and do what they can to move the load between them later on. In other words, in the field of labouring, both have to contribute according to their abilities. There is, too, a third possibility, which is hardly ever spotted in the reading of this passage, which is why I'm going to carefully interpret it for you now. Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you." And he says something very interesting which we miss. He says, "Take my yoke upon you." And in the next phrase, he says, "and learn from me." Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. And this gives us the third interpretation. In other words, your ultimate burden is not going to change, but I will show you how I do it. I will show you how to do it so that you can do a similar thing just as easily as I do. I know it looks impossible, but I will show you the way, and then you'll manage. For me, that's a bit like the story of give a man a fish and he can eat for a day, show him how to fish, and he can feed himself for the rest of his life. I rather like the third interpretation. So we have these three different interpretations which can apply to our own lives. So which is correct, you might ask? Well, in the first, Jesus enables things to happen when the chips are down and when we're exhausted. We are passive recipients, but the work gets done. This is God taking up the burden when things are just too much for us. In the second, Jesus and people are partners, sharing the load between us according to our abilities, which is fine for those times when we have more strength. We are no longer passive, but active. And thirdly, we have this model where Jesus helps us out in the short term, modeling for us how he would do it to ensure that we can do it in the long term without constant intervention. But it doesn't preclude the possibility of him coming in and helping out if we get stuck. The impression is that this caring, facilitating teacher is watching over us from just over the way. I don't know if you can remember, but I remember how difficult it was for me to allow my daughter allow my daughter taking her first steps. There was a chance she'd fall over. But without the risk of a fall, there can be no progress. Without the attempt at a first step, running anywhere is impossible. As I discovered when I took the reins off my daughter one day in a shopping centre for the first time. there's a risk that they might be off at high speed, chuckling to themselves in their newfound freedom. In all three interpretations, there is something there, isn't there? I don't think that there is a single correct interpretation. All three have something to offer at a different time in our lives and in the lives of our community. When we're exhausted, when we've just lost a loved one perhaps, well, maybe then the first explanation is favoured. When we're getting back to health or the loss of a loved one is recent but not raw, well, then perhaps the second one is favoured. And when life has been good to us, perhaps we need to feel active and responsible, but need to have the reassurance that there is someone watching over us from a distance, like a safety net, then perhaps the third one is the most appropriate. Beauty of this passage, in my opinion, is that it does what it needs to do where we are. It speaks to us in our current need, where we are. When the COVID-19 crisis first started a few months ago, I suspect that many people in our community would have found the first explanation most appropriate, not forgetting those in other categories, of course, because there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Now things have moved on, anxiety is lessened, we're in the so-called amber phase. I think most people are now in the second category around here, and some are transferring to the third. God speaks to us differently at different times in our life. And if, in the depths of winter, God starts speaking to us more through the first category once again, well, then we know that things are often cyclical, and maybe perhaps a few weeks later, we will be back to a more positive interpretation once again. So if in the winter things become bad with coronavirus, just remember something new is round the corner and the positive times are just a few weeks away. We just have to sit out the winter respiratory season. So today's gospel tells us that it is okay to feel a variety of emotions in life without guilt. We need to be aware of our circumstances, but we also need to be aware of what God is doing in our lives. And at the times when we can't go on, we need to be aware that He will be there to help us. When we're struggling a bit, that's when He will share the work with us, helping us out. And when we're back on our feet, He will show us how to go on and keep an eye on us without interfering unless we need help, because He has shown us the way. So in conclusion, today's passage is about support in faith, freedom to hope, and practical love. And a very reassuring and calming passage it is too, in all manner of parts of human existence and experience. Well, God bless. See you soon. Amen.